what's your favorite game? I've got invaders in my sights and I'm taking aim. Some you win and some you lose. Move on over, Dad, I wanna play Atari too. Oh, hey, Australia, what's your favorite game? There's only one name, Atari. Atari.
Welcome back. Today we're going to get started with the first step in the process of developing a game for the Atari 2600. The Atari 2600 began its life with the codename Stella and was released as the Atari VCS. It wasn't until 1982 when it was renamed the Atari 2600 to fall in line with the new naming convention for the new machines. According to the user I Hate the Bears on the Atari Age website, he has compiled a list of 471 officially released games. These are not including the games released under the Sears brand, which were just renamed copies of already existing games. After the Atari 2600 ceased production, it didn't mean that the game stopped. The homebrew community stepped up and continued production of games all up until today. In fact, the community is still vibrant, there's lots of tutorials and websites out there, and lots of people still actively developing for the Atari 2600. Today we're going to install two pieces of software, an Atari 2600 emulator called Stella and an 8-bit compiler called DASM. Using those two, we're going to take a small snippet of code, compile it, and run it in the emulator to make sure everything's working. That will be our first step to creating our own game. This software can run on all the major operating systems. We're going to start basic with just an emulator and a compiler and Notepad.
First, we'll install Stella and make sure it's working by loading up the ROM for Space Invaders. Stella is a multi-platform Atari emulator first created in 1995 and still in development today. It interprets the game code in the same way the hardware of a real Atari console would, allowing us to run games on many different operating systems. The link to the Stella homepage is below. Once there, you will see under Stable Releases, there are versions for a few operating systems. Choose the one that matches yours. When it's done downloading, run the installation file. Due to security settings on my machine, I get a warning message. For me, this is okay, so I will allow the installation to continue. Choose where to install the application and then click Install and Finish. Before we go any further, it's important to check if our emulator is working correctly before we try to test any of our own code on it. So for this, we're going to take a ROM file for the game Space Invaders and see if we can get it working. A quick word first before we load up Space Invaders to test. ROM files of games are a legal gray area as the file contains the full game and may be illegal due to copyright laws. In some cases, making and possessing a copy of a game's ROM may be legal if you own a physical copy of the game. In this case, I do own a copy of Space Invaders for the Atari 2600. Looks like everything is working perfectly. Now that we have the ability to run some code, let's get a compiler to turn our code into something the emulator can read. DASM is an 8-bit macro assembler first created in 1987 and still actively maintained. It takes our instructions and compiles them into a binary file able to be executed by the MOS 6507 processor at the heart of the Atari 2600 and emulated by Stella. It's available on many different operating systems as well. We're going to open that archive and copy the files into another folder. We can see the DASM executable in the root folder, and in the machines folder, there are a couple of special files included to be used for Atari 2600 development. So let's run our program. I copied a snippet of code from an online forum to test our development environment. When it's running in Stella, it should simply change the background to the color blue. There are, however, a couple of lines we need to change. The lines pointing to two files, vcs.h and macro.h. Those are those special files included with DASM. We just need to know where the files are located and change those two lines. Now we save the file and then execute the compiler and tell it to turn our code into binary files using instructions for the MOS 6502 processor. Previously I mentioned the Atari 2600 uses a MOS 6507, which is correct, but the processor is just a slightly modified version of the MOS 6502 and uses the 6502 instruction set. Now, let's go into Stella and run our test ROM. Perfect. Our screen is blue and everything is good. We've made the first step of our journey. The code used in this episode is available at the link below. If you know Git, feel free to clone the repository. In the future, all the code used in all the episodes will be available there.
Thanks for watching, and I hope that you'll stick around as we continue our journey to create a game for the Atari 2600. Please like and subscribe and share this with all your like-minded friends. Let's start to build a community so that we can share together and grow together. So what game did you really like for the Atari 2600? What was the game that you continue to play over and over again? And what exactly was it that you thought made it fun? Share in the comments below. I'd really like to know. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.
If you or any member of your family is hopelessly hooked on Atari, call this toll-free number.
Hello, Atari Anonymous?